I know many people are wondering what this anti-racist team is going to be talking about. And so we just wanted to start off our conversation today, kind of giving you an understanding of what this anti-racist team is and what it isn't. So what this opportunity that we're going to share with you this morning is not going to be, this is what we've learned, and this is what we're going to teach you, right? This is not an opportunity for us to bash you over the head with information and say, these are behaviors we've seen, and this is what you need to do to change them. This is not what the conversation today is going to be like. The conversation, what it's going to be like is a walk through kind of the experiences we've had this past year. I started off in March 7th of 2020. I would say a day or 2 days before there was a complete shutdown, a week before the shutdown happened in Indianapolis for the pandemic. And so since then and until today, we have been working with ourselves, but also with the help of the Crossroads team who deals with anti-racism in institutional settings. And so there's some things that we've learned that we want to share with you all today. And a part of that has to do with, talks about who we are as individuals. And so really want to have an opportunity to share with you these experiences that we have to help shape where we're moving in within this the next couple of years here at Central Christian Church. Now, one of the things that we understand, we're not talking about interpersonal racism. We're not talking about the racism in which can be done from person to person. We're talking about systematic. And what we realize is that systematic racism is entwined in everything that we do, whether it be inside the church, but also outside. And so our focus is on the inside of the church. And so what we understand is that in order for us to move forward, we need to address and see how systematic racism has affected us as a community. And so given the fact that racism isn't something of the past, that it's still present today, the question that leads us to start off is, given that racism today is inseparable from the past and continues to be adapted, what are the things from our history that we must be mindful of as we move forward? And so I just want to present that to our panel. And Sandra, if you want to start with us, if you want to start with us.
Sorry.
May I speak here?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, this is totally new, to be able to use the telephone and to talk to you at the same time.
Yeah, there's no video on here, by the way. So.
Just the microphone. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And smile. Well, being a part of this team has really been a great opportunity for me to go back and look at some of the things in the past, some of the systems of the past that I find continue today. And some of the things that I think that we as Christians, that we at Central, that we need to always be mindful of. And I can think of 3 or 4 things. And one of the first one is that Eurocentric image of Christ that we should never forget from the past. That is one of those things that we don't want to bring to the present. And during the training, one of the things that really struck me was one of the images of Christ. And I think you know it is the image by Solomon, the long, blonde, blue-eyed Christ, you know. And I think that type of image reinforces the status quo of American racial hierarchy. that's something I think that we as Centralites really need to keep in mind to try to avoid this Eurocentric image of Christ. Another, I think, is code language. You know, in the past, we knew that it was not appropriate to use the N word or some of the other words that are used to demonize or disparage people of color. But keeping in mind also that there's another code language that exists today. And that's when we talk about state rights, personal rights, cutting taxes, cut social services, welfare, unite the right. Those are just as damaging as the N word that we may have used in the past. Another, I think, is that colorblind conservatism. Let's keep in mind that when we say, well, you know, I have Black friends, so I'm not racist, that's not good enough. When we say, well, you know, I don't see color, I think that tends to insult the person of color. Because now what you're actually saying is that you don't see my humanity. You don't see me for who I am. You don't see what I have suffered in the past. So that's one of the things too that being a part of this team has caused me to really think about, one of the systems of the past that continues. But more importantly, I think the stereotypes. Roughly the same, and I'll give you just a couple of examples of what I'm talking about. Roughly the same number of drug users among African Americans is about the same as among whites. But the incarceration rate for Blacks is like 6 times higher. That we may look at as being a part of the past. But what we need to see as part of the present now is that within our culture now, there are people of what we would call the dominant class that are making a profit from these same marijuana or drugs that cause a lot of African Americans to be incarcerated, are making a huge profit off of marijuana and CBD. And that's something that we don't always think about. And as a part of this, this being a part of this team, one of the books that really inspired me has been Isabel Wilkerson's Caste. And one of the things that she mentions in that book is that 1 in 5 African Americans considered poor, just 1 out of 5. That's less than 20%. And of the African American population, is roughly 1/4 of African Americans within the U.S. Society will be considered poor. That means 3/4 are actually white. But our news media tends to feed us in such a way that 59% of the people who are on TV are poor Blacks, and less than 17% of whites are pictured as being poor. So what happens now is that Black becomes a synonym for poor or poverty. And that's one of the systemic problems that we have with our news media and all, that really tends to make us see people of color in a very, very negative light. There are other examples, but those are some of the things I just mentioned that I've been empowered by as being a part of this team. One other statistic while we're waiting for Louis to come around is something that I read just a couple of days ago. The Samuel Dubois Center, running up the down escalator. There was a survey done just recently that found white Americans, 39% of white Republicans and 33% of white Democrats believe that Black people are less evolved than whites, which is why it's easy to circulate myths such as the welfare queen and a culture of poverty. So as a part of our learning, I've really been attuned to a lot of the statistics that tend to keep people of color really down. Thank you. Smile.
Smile. Just want to thank you, Sandra, for sharing that with us. As I continue to look at all of us who are here, each of us enters into that story in different ways. Is there anyone else want to share how, from their perspective, how racism today is inseparable from the past?
Blake here. So how is race today inseparable from the past? I think you can look over especially the past of this country and see that there have been so many different laws, even like it's from even the government. And, you know, there have been laws that have specifically been put in place to keep Black people down. And that's how I take it. And I think a lot of churches have to kind of struggle with the fact that in many cases in the past, they have supported such laws. Just for instance, what I'm thinking about are like redlining and the inability for people of color to get loans in order to get a house. Building generational wealth was almost impossible whenever you couldn't get a house. You think about the abolition of slavery and then having, what was the 14th Amendment that made it to where as long as you were an incarcerated individual, you could still be forced to do free labor. That doesn't sound like slavery was ended to me. And all that stuff kind of, you go through that. There's all the Jim Crow, there's the civil rights movement. Sandra pointed out that, you know, as people started to point out that, how to get the, what is it? The school to prison pipeline. If you haven't heard of that, look it up, because it talks about a lot of things in society that have set up to kind of keep the private prison, what is it? Economy or industry. Thank you, Linda. Keeping those things alive and well, and it's just sickening. So all these things just kind of build upon each other. That's why you hear people talk about the new Jim Crow, because every time something, like when slavery is abolished or when something else is abolished that has historically kept Black people down, it is consistently being renewed with something else. And we look at that, all those things, and we look at how statistically people of color have a really tough time getting ahead in the world. It's because they haven't been able to build that generational wealth. Not only that, I mean, I feel like a huge part of being able to be successful in life is having a lot of, I don't want to say safety nets, but communities. And these kinds of things of, you know, laws in the past that have consistently or sent more people of color to prison tears families apart. And like me growing up, I never worry about, you know, whether or not I was going to have food on the table, or whether or not my dad was going to be arrested for, you know, driving while Black, essentially. And there's so many different, I feel like, Black families who have been affected by that just kind of it turns their world upside down. How do you recover from something like that? It's so incredibly difficult. So it's so hard to talk about just one thing without thinking about the bigger picture of like why racism has affected us so badly as a nation, as a society. And that's kind of where why I decided to join the anti-racism team, is because I see issues with society, but I don't feel like I can make a big enough wave to change society. But what I can do is be perspective and retrospective about the things that I take part in, such as this church, and see whether or not they are forwarding those kinds of ideals, or whether or not they're being more critical of the things that they're doing and trying to make themselves better. Because I think it was Maya Angelou who said, do what you can, what'd she say? Do what you can until you know better. Do what you can until you know better, and then learn, and then do better, or something like that. I'm sorry, Maya Angelou. I murdered that quote. But that's it. I mean, I think we're starting to know better, and since we know better now, we need to take a look and change what we're doing, so that, when we look back in 5 years or 1 year, we say, oh, that wasn't so great. I think we can do even better. So I want to change my community before I think about changing the entire world. But that's how I see all this.
Central has had a reputation. Thank you, Blake, very much. Central has had a reputation for being progressive and perhaps even woke. We often speak about the realities of racism and are aware of how power is used to marginalize people. However, in our learnings with Crossroads, are there anything that we have gleaned that can help us understand how Central's relationship to institutional racism? So, Erin, would you mind speaking a little bit about that?
So, I would really say that when I started on this personal journey with the team, I could easily acknowledge, yes, we live in a racist society, both historically and currently. And because of this fact, our church could not escape that. There was no way for our church to be innocent within the larger context. And so I really spent a lot of time looking for very specifically, how does that show up at Central? And I've come to see it in a couple of ways. One of them is, I think we talk about where we go to church is based on preference. But I want to say that preference is maybe a myth. Well, it's maybe not a myth, but it is inherently tied to privilege. So this came to me in the coffee shop the other day. I asked for a cafe latte made with soy. That's my preference. And the barista's like, we don't have any soy. And I was like, okay, I'll just have a regular latte with regular milk. So my preference was soy, but because they didn't have it, because I don't have any food allergies, could make a different choice. I have a privilege when it comes to food. Like, I can eat whatever I want to eat. So this clarified for me. So my oldest son has multiple food allergies, as many know. And so if he went into the store and requested a cafe latte made with soy, and they said, oh, dude, we don't have any soy, we've only got dairy, they would say, you're out of luck, and he has to make a different choice. His choices then become determinant based on his needs and who he is. So I think the church is a little bit like this. So as a white, straight woman, I have so many choices of church where I could go. And that list would change if I were a white gay woman. And that choice narrows again, the more and more differences that I might have. So I think you really need to think about, when we talk about choice and church, I would argue that hiding in there is this element of privilege. So I have heard members at Central who are people of color say that they have to be willing to give something up to participate at Central. And this really reinforces for me that church choice is probably tied to privilege, and privilege is inherently tied to racism. So another way for me, very tangibly, where this has showed up is how we talk about time. And I think time has a cultural aspect to it. And so I realize that when I sometimes come into an event and it doesn't start on time, my first thought is, they don't respect my time. Where somebody else who's coming into the event might have a different view on what is their time. And so I think we see that sometimes at Central, that the element of time, and I would add into that the element of spontaneity, and we sort of talked about it at worship this morning just a little bit, which is, I expect a very ordered, practiced worship service. And if there was room for spontaneity within it, I struggle with that. And I think that is a perpetuation of white-centeredness. And we as a church need to think about, what does time mean for different people? How do we approach worship and that element of time? So that's what I have to share.
We're getting it. It's just taking a minute. It's taking a little time. Yeah, I wanted to add just a real concrete, quick example of this that was very eye-opening to me, picking up on Aaron's last topic of time. So our website, a couple years ago, on the homepage said a bunch of things, but among them it said, worship begins promptly at 10:30. So the person of color to my left just chuckled. And somebody else who was new to us, who was a person of color, shared a reaction that did not make them feel welcome. That the promptness of starting worship at 10:30 is code language for, we expect people to follow our rules, to be a certain way, to arrive at a certain time. And that just doesn't feel welcoming to all people. So I just wanted to throw that in as one small and big example.
Sorry, I forgot to hit unmute. Classic Luis. I know as you're looking up here, you notice that there's only about 5 of us, but the group is much larger. There are several people who are not with us here today, and there's one who is at home as well. And so the makeup of this group is just as intentional as the work in itself. And one of the things that I have appreciated as a person of color in this group is that there's a lot of listening. One of the things that's been great about this experience is the space to listen. And sometimes we want to go and put our defenses up whenever there is a difficult conversation. And there are many times in which we try to be careful about what we say as to not hurt or, damage the kind of relationships that are being fostered in this space. But one of the things in my experience of working in this group is that whenever myself or others have challenged some of that white-centeredness, there has been listening, there has been grieving in those particular opportunities, and there's been some growth. And so I want to be clear that, and I can't speak for every person of color in our group, but for myself, the work that we're doing here isn't just on the surface. I just want to be clear about that this intentional work that we're trying to do is for the betterment of the church. The other day I was having a conversation with a colleague, and one of the things that I think is important as we think about the work of anti-racism moving forward and thinking about is, what are your hopes for the future, right? And if you want to have a future in which those who are coming behind us are going to be able to address the issues of systematic racism in their church and the outside, we need to create a space and an environment where that can grow. Well, you say, well, that's interesting. Well, I mean, as we said before, Central has been pretty woke, right? We understand these issues. We, on the back of our shirts and on our bulletins and everywhere we go, we're fighting oppressions and injustice wherever it may go, right? We are actively in that process. But you can still actively fight something and be totally oblivious to how you are participating in the perpetuating of those systems. And so the church as a whole, right, not just speaking for Central, but the church as a whole has consistently perpetuated whiteness throughout its history. And so I don't say this as a person of color who's your pastor serving in a predominantly white church. I don't say this to point the finger and say, you need to change. What I'm saying is all of us have a role to do in dismantling those systems. And the biggest fear about doing that is we do not know what the future looks like. And we do not know what church looks like. If church has only been this way, if church has only looked this way for centuries, the possibility of dismantling it and creating something in this space, the fear of that is, what does it look like? If I don't get to sing hymns, if I don't get to sing stained glasses, if I don't get to hear the organ, am I having church? If I don't have spontaneity, am I having church? And so the questions that we push and move forward isn't just for conversation, but it's about the life of the congregation that we have now and what we're trying to create. Some people would say, well, Pastor Luis, we can't be all things to all people. You're right, we cannot. But we can be all things to one group of people more than anything else. And that's what church has been. A predominant group of people having its way. And that's some hard things to listen to. That is some hard news to hear. Well, Pastor Luis, I do this, I do that. That's awesome. And we want to acknowledge, I want to acknowledge all the hard work many of the people of Central Christian Church have done over the years to address issues of oppression and systematic issues within our church. But this is an opportunity for us to all step back and look that while we have been addressing those things, we perpetuate those systems. There really isn't a question that follows this, to be honest, but I wanted to share how my joy in being a part of this group has been watching us deal with the messy things. In many ways, we are like the plumbers of the church. Nobody wants to unclog a drain. And, paid well, yeah. Nobody wants to clog a clogged toilet, but this is what the work is. It's messy. And sometimes doing the messy stuff, and it doesn't really have a a quantifiable thing at the end where we can say, this is the goal, we've reached it, and we've finished what we've done. The challenge about this work, and I'm reminded about something Grace said a while back last year doing her first year with us as a student pastor. I can't recall if it was in her first sermon or not, but she mentioned that an old Jewish saying, and I heard that saying during my time at Wabash as well, but do not be afraid of the task that does not have an end, right? Regardless if we get to see the end of what we're trying to do, we're still responsible in doing the work. And so above all else, I think what our group is trying to tangibly work towards is an understanding that we're putting our first foot forward and then our second. And we're going to continue to walk and journey along in this process, and we're going to do the work that is required. And there may be something tangible to grasp and say, hey, we've accomplished this, we finished this, here it is. But the reality is that we pass that work along to the next group, and the next group continues, and then the next group continues. And when we're all gone from this place, right, thinking about today's sermon, when the sun goes up and the sun goes down, life, the next person will continue that work, and it will continue it until we've addressed those issues. So as I'm looking at time and I'm thinking about where we're at, I want to take this opportunity to see if there's any questions, if there's any things that are weighing on your mind that you are wanting to access as a group, if there are things in which you are personally grieving as you listen to this, and you want to say, well, you know, anti-racism group, is there something, we just want to ask you, have you thought about this? Or have you thought about this? This is an opportunity to do so. And for the people at home, feel free to raise your hands or even write those into your, into the chat box so that we can say that out loud here. For people in the room, raise your hands. I'll move over to you so you can use the mic and, and people at home can hear you. So this is an opportunity for us, for any of you to ask any questions that are weighing at you at the moment. Grace, why don't you? Yeah, come on down. Okay. This is the song that goes on for that. Okay. There's a song. There you go.
So thank you guys for being here and for your service on the panel. I have heard a lot about the work that you're doing from Chris, who unfortunately can't be here today. But one question I have for you guys is, one thing I sense in the work of anti-racism and the work that you guys are doing is balancing this tension between, this work is extremely urgent. There are life and death stakes for many people, maybe not in the work that we do as a congregation, but just generally in the work of anti-racism. There are these really high stakes, and the stakes have been high for a long time, and people of color have been asked to wait a lot wait for justice, wait for their humanity to be acknowledged. So there is that, for me, that sense of urgency. But then there's also this sense of white saviorism. We have to go and fix all those problems the second in the way that we think is the best way to fix those problems. So that's a tension that I sense in this work. And I'm wondering if that is something you guys have been thinking through and how you guys have kind of acknowledged that tension in this work that you're doing.
So I would say definitely that has shown up time and time again, the sense of urgency, and coupled with the sense of complexity. So we are aware of that. I think what we struggle with, a lot of the conversation has been about how do you change the systems without changing the people? Because we keep saying, oh, we're looking at the system as central. This isn't about changing Joe who shares the pew with you. This is about the system of Central. But the one of the great things I think about anti-racism that's been very helpful is we can engage in and. So the or thinking is white-centeredness. When we say, oh, we have to choose, we don't have to choose. Our transformational values come out of and thinking. And so when we go through that, we sort of go back to, wait, let's go back to those transformational values where we talk back to scarcity. We talk back to either or thinking. We talk back to competitiveness and individualistic notions. So thank you for that point.
Is there anyone else before we get to anyone else wants to answer that question?
Well, I would say that Blake here, if you couldn't tell. One thing that I would say is that the part about being a white savior is a very, I mean, there's a line by Ben Haggerty, also known as Macklemore, if you guys know who that is, who talks about white privilege and white guilt at the same time, which is something that I struggle with all the time. And the white guilt about being a part of this anti-racism was kind of setting heavily on me before I decided to join. And I was like, what do I, as a straight white man, have to add to something that can be anti-racist? And then it just kind of like hit me over the head that like, who better, right? So the white savior part, I think, or my personal feeling is like, I can't let the fear of like somebody considering me to be a white savior to stop me, because I think it's about time that we stop depending on people of color to teach us not how to be racist. And to be anti-racist for that matter. So I think Luis had said something very important to this point, which is very intentional the way that this group is made up. And I think that's because we need white people to step up and be retrospective and introspective about how we can be better in our systems. But we also need people of color to call out our white-centeredness so that we make sure that we're doing it correctly. But and it's a very lot of communication happens. It's not prescriptive. Nobody's really like being a tyrant about anything. It's a back and forth conversation where we learn from one another, so that we can stop depending on people of color to do what we should have been doing all along. So.
Hold this here and just speak up.
Brian Grant here. Well, I've been kind of turning over in my head throughout the conversation the differences between what we want and perhaps what we should want in terms of the kind of future we're trying to create. My primary investment, I suppose, in being a part of this congregation is it would strengthen me in my work for justice and a whole lot of other things out in the world. And I'm not sure that that can best be done by trying to make this congregation as kind of percentage-wise representative of the broader community as if that interferes with its ability to strengthen me in my work in the broader community. The time thing is really interesting to me in that regard. I don't want a church that's starting 15 minutes late regularly. I have to see my clients on the hour. I have to stop on time. I get that if a person is from a culture which views time differently, that may make this less welcoming to them, but it also may make us less effective as change agents in the broader world. And I'm curious what other people think about that.
Thank you. I would say, just to, because I know we're talking about time, we're going to be seeing time in many different platforms here at Central. The moment we decided to be a church that's intentional of being hybrid. We are now trying to make sure that people who are not in our space are connecting with us. And so far, technology has been good to us that we have not had to prolong our service before we have had to begin. Meaning, in the past, when everyone was at home, when technology wasn't going right, we had to postpone a 10:30 start in order to get the service moving forward. Now, it wasn't an everyday thing. But, you know, it's one of those things that what we're saying in general as far as time is the flexibility. I don't necessarily think we're going to say, hey, we're going to start church, you hate to use the word late, but not as scheduled on a regular basis. But to have some flexibility. And also that means how long a service goes. If we're always used that a church is an hour and 15 minutes, that's great. But sometimes it may go longer depending on what has been programmed. And I think overall, thinking about time is about thinking about the flexibility one has. It isn't just to be as is, meaning it doesn't have to be, it's either this or that. It could be a both and. We can look at time and we can look at the work as we're doing as something that is flexible and kind of ongoing. It isn't something that it has to do this now. We all have to change this now, and we all have to think about it in this way now. I know for a fact, I mean, I come from a tradition that church starts, let's say at 10:30, and worship didn't start until 15, 20 minutes later. And sometimes people knew that. And then sometimes people would say, even within my tradition, would say, hey, we should start in time. But I think the thought about time is for us to be flexible, for us to think about how others perceive it, right? I'm pretty sure that when you were raising children, I know myself, I'm trying to get my daughter accustomed to time in the morning. Right? School starts at 8. I don't want to be up at 8:50 because I only got 10 minutes till we get there. For my child, time is ongoing, right? Time only begins the moment she wakes up her eyes, right? And even for my 9-year-old, time only begins when you wake up in the morning. So it's how do we help people, in a sense, understand different points of view of how we see things. I don't think what we're moving towards is to a change in service time or saying we're going to start later, get used to it. I think it's for us to process about sometimes how our rigidness can make other people feel in that particular space. So.
I'll piggyback on that. I also think it's about that rigidness. It's also about opening up perspective. And again, I think I'll go back to when I heard a person of color in our congregation say, and more than one person I've heard say this, that they give something up to participate at Central. They give something up. And so when I heard that, and I heard that in my heart, I sat and thought to myself, what would I give up to participate at Central? And I tried to make the list of what that would be. And I could not think of one single thing I was willing to give up to stay here. That is my white privilege talking. Absolutely. So again, it comes back to absolutely, we want to nourish people to do the work out in the world. That's important. That's part of our group's mission statement is, but it is not the focus of what our goal is, which is looking at the system of Central. So that may work for some people and that may not work for some people.
I would love to say something. This is Blake, by the way. Brian, I think it was a great point, and thanks for sharing and asking the question. And I think a lot of what I consider, because I'm very much the same way, I like to be on time when I can be, which is a funny thing to say because I was 6 minutes late today. I'm supposed to be here at 11:30. Anyway, one thing I would say is that I think nobody ever looks down upon me for liking to be on time. And I think the thing that we should strive for is like they said, being flexible. And I think flexibility also means not making somebody feel like less than because they weren't able to show up on time. I don't know that we necessarily, like they said, there's no plans to change the start time. But yeah, I've been to many churches. I've worked in a lot of them as a musician, and the flexibility and the way that people can handle that kind of thing, or just like celebrate when people can come, and making sure that they feel welcomed and not, I don't know, I'm spinning around the point that I'm trying to make, and I can't really think about what the point is that I'm trying to make, other than we should just try to conduct ourselves in a way that's, makes people feel welcomed, and not that they did something bad because they have, they came late for whatever reason, or if somebody decides to delay the ending of the sermon. Like, I've been in churches where people will stand up and shout, or even ask a question to the pastor to expand upon an idea, which maybe extended the sermon 15 minutes because it was a great question that maybe other people had on their minds. If something like that happened at Central, I'm sure people would be like, what is going on? Oh, no. So being open to those kinds of situations, not making people feel weird for, I feel sometimes people are even hesitant to say an amen, like to something that Linda says. That's the kind of flexibility that I think people would want in a church that they come to, because like it says, come as you are, right? Some people are late. I've been late before. It's happened to me. And that's just these are all the kinds of things that are going through my mind. I'm much more of a person that takes a question, thinks about it, types it out, all the good punctuation. So speaking on the fly is a little weird. Hope this wasn't too confusing to listen to my crazy man ramblings, but yeah, go ahead. Linda, much more effectively will make the point.
No, I just we've been kind of focused on the issue of time. So I just want to broaden that a little bit. So there are many elements of worship that are important to us, or unimportant, that we like, that we don't like. I think the issue, and something I would say that I have tried to work on for a long time here, is what we will be open to as part of our worship experience. We kind of have a tendency, and I think this is true for especially white, mainstream, Protestant, established traditional church people, of sort of judging the elements of a worship service. And apart from the whole issue of race, even if we were all white, all Black, all Hispanic, all Asian, there is no one group of people where everybody likes the same things. And so I think part of what we have to do, and perhaps more so in the context of anti-racism work, is kind of get to a point where we think, okay, if I liked everything in that worship service, it was not a good service, because that means that there were a lot of other people for whom it was not meaningful, because God speaks in different ways and in different forms to different people, different music, different styles, et cetera, et cetera. So coming to the end of a sermon and saying, I personally liked some of it. I personally didn't like some of it, but that's what it means to be in a community that is trying to be welcoming to different kinds of people.
That was me, sorry. One thing I would add, though.
Hold on, before you add, I just I want to add for the people here who are not able to see what's online. Someone had wrote one thing I learned about time from Jim's experience in Kenya is that flexible time can actually be more respectful of human beings and relationships. That starting late puts people and our relationships with them first. Which is more important, to start on time or to greet someone in the way that makes them feel seen?
Brian, I hope you don't like picking on you or anything. But as somebody who's very in my work, in my personal work, I am very much somebody who likes time boxes, and I need them in order to remain effective at my job. So I might flip the question or flip the expectation. Let's say that we do have a less or a more flexible experience in one worship, but I have somewhere I got to be at 1 o'clock. If I were to get up and have to walk out because I have something that I need to do in order to, remain effective in my personal life, or maybe it's through spreading, joy or something about church, anything like that, I hope nobody would judge me or like make me less than because I couldn't stay for the whole thing. So it's those kinds of conversations that happen in these anti-racist things where things get flipped, right? To think about from a different perspective. But I think that's just what I shouldn't have brought it back to time, because I think they made great not to focus on. But that's kind of how we could think about it. Is like we all have different ways that we live life, and that extends to church as well. So as long as I would say you're getting out what you need to get out of it, just I would say I hope everybody just respects that everybody should be able to do that in their own way.
Keith, you have a question? Come on up. No, yeah, we're gonna come on up. We're gonna hold this in one hand and speak at the mic in the other.
I'm supposed to do this both.
Just hold that and talk to you on. Yeah.
I could.
You don't need to look at that. There. So.
I could continue the process of discussing time, but I'm not going to do that. I want to turn to a different topic, and I'm wondering what we might be able to learn from our own experience as a church in the past. And I'm going to risk using something other than matters of race as the example. And that is another aspect of human life in American society that is a challenge to many people, is LGBTQ. And one of the things that has happened at Central Christian Church, as I understand our past, it is that around 25 years ago or so, we made a dramatic change in our church's life in which we became open to this part of the Indianapolis community in a way that no one could have imagined a little while earlier. Now, I've talked with various people who've given me stories about that and explanations and so on. This is not the time to go into that. But it is something that has made a great difference in the life of this congregation over this period of time. And it might be interesting and constructive for the task force to think about or to find out more about what happened in our church that has made a significant difference at virtually every point, as far as I know, for the good in what this church is and what it can do. And it may be that learning from our own experience in an analogous aspect of challenge can help us as we look forward to what might be possible for us to do that would open us in a new way to the complexity of racial life and history in our city and in our nation.
Thank you, Keith. And that was a comment, not a question, if I understand that correctly. Thank you, Keith. Are there any other questions? Looking at time, we have about 15 minutes left, and I want to be respectful of everyone who has been here with us, whether online or in person. Are there any other questions that you have for us as a community, as a team that's working within Central to help dismantle systematic racism? Yes, I'm sorry, I can't see who you are. Sally, come on down, Sally. If I had the Price is Right music, I would.
Okay, Aaron, you had said that people of color have to give something up to participate here. And I was wondering what that looks like and how you guys plan to address that.
Thank you, Sally. I noticed, we're going to answer that question, but I just want to say I did notice that Caroline Higginbotham had put a question there. So just want to acknowledge that. So I can't really answer. Yeah. But I can answer that because I and Sandra, I know Sandra can. Donna, you're at home. You definitely can. Donna, do you want to unmute yourself and go ahead and go ahead, Donna. She's taking an opportunity. I gotcha. She's pulling herself together.
So this is an example of what we go through when this team comes together. There will be questions, there will be expressions of conversations okay, let me say something. I will answer the question that was asked about and giving an example of what I have given up. I think that it was my comments in one of our meetings that Erin keeps referring to. But I want to also speak about a dynamic of our presentation today that, in a way, and I'm sorry I'm going to have to do this, but I really feel like I need to do this, gives you an example of how this group has interfaced together and have learned together. In the panel presentation today, we worked really hard at responding to the realization that two people that we had anticipated being part of the panel were called away almost at the last minute. And they were both white men. And so we had this conversation online about, well, we really need a white man on the panel because that's part of the voice that we need to hear. And so Blake volunteered to do that and did so in a very graceful way. But I have to say, Blake, you've talked too much. So it almost feels like you have to have the last word, and that's uncomfortable to me.
Wow.
So I need you to hear that. And that's all I want to say about that. Now, as for the question, the sharings that Erin has offered, speaking about or referring to what I know that I said at one of our meetings in terms of what I've had to give up. And I wasn't the only one in that conversation, but I remembered what I said. I spoke about how when Judith and I came to Indianapolis and we looked at churches to attend, we went church shopping like most people do when they go to a new town. And we made the decision to come to Central for a variety of reasons. And time went on. But what I learned and experienced was one of the things that I missed and missed deeply is the kind of music that I was accustomed to in going to Black church. And and that's not something that I can get at Central. It's just not a part. It doesn't feel like a part of our worship experience and music offerings. I know that I have experienced in other churches more of a blend than we receive at Central, but it's been my experience at Central that it's just not part of our repertoire. And I miss that. That's part of what feeds my soul. I mean, so I find myself now watching television, listening to music that I would otherwise be accustomed to hearing in Black church. So when you ask the question of what might a person of color give up to be a member at Central, that's part of what I have to give up, because it's just not there. It's not even an option.
Thank you, Donna.
I just make a couple of comments about some of the things that this is.
It's okay.
Give him a minute. That's great. Okay. Within the Black church, I think that the Black church was set up in such a way that even the biblical teachings informed the experiences of racial suffering, oppression, and perseverance by oppressed people. So that is something that I tend to miss. And it's not something that I would expect to happen in Central, because often I've shared with people why I even came to Central. One of the reasons that I came was I was attracted by Linda's experience and the sense of welcome in the church. But in agreement with Donna, the music is something that you have to give up. When we talk about Black music, we're talking about lamenting. The music offers the pain and the suffering, but also the hope that one has. Earlier on, while the technology was being arranged, Blake started out with "There Is a Balm in Gilead," and that sent chills through me, because that is something that you really have to feel it. It's not just singing Black music, but it is also that whole process of understanding what is being said in those songs, is understanding the pain and the suffering. So for me, even when we sing Black music, what's missing is the depth of that music and how it moves you, how it expresses the pain and suffering that one has. Now, having said all of that, I think that one of the gifts that has been given to Central recently has been the Congolese church that is meeting here now on a Sunday with worship scheduled to begin at 11:30. But the music there is very, very similar to the music that's found in Black churches. It moves you, it fills you, you can feel the pain and suffering. And at the same time, you can feel the hope. So that's something I lift up. You know, anytime we finish service here around 11:30, quarter to 12, if you just want to just sit in and just feel the music, feel that pain, feel that spirit that Donna spoke about, or what I've tried to express now, it's amazing.
So I want to I'm going to answer that question too, Sally, but I want to just comment real quick some of the things in the chat. John said, here's another question that comes from a different arena that has come to mind. With respect to the internal aspect of the panel's focus on Central specifically, has a topic of biblical religious imagery and liturgy come up? And what are your thoughts? An example that comes to mind is the privileged whiteness, and B, though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow, and dark night of the soul reinforces that notion. Without going into depth, yes, we have talked about those aspects. Kathy has mentioned it's also missed the richness of different types of musical selections that's been a part of my previous church experience. In the churches we attended before we moved here, we had 3 congregations that shared worship, including in different languages and musical styles, Latino and Puerto Rican congregants. Laotian, sorry. I do want to add, and I want to be clear, when we talk about worship, we're not trying to say we don't see intentionality. I think the problem is, as what Sandra says, you can be as intentional, but there's things that are missing in that part. And there's some things that cannot be replicated. One of the things that I had given up, and I'm not going to continue the point of worship styles or songs or stuff like that, but what I have actually given up in being a part of Central is my future of pastoring in the Hispanic context. By coming to an open and affirming congregation, I have given up my opportunity to lead Hispanic churches. So when I share with you in sermons that I want to create memories with this community, there's a purpose behind that. I can go worship, I can go participate, but for me to ever sit and lead a Hispanic community, unless I'm a part of creating it, that won't happen. That will not happen for me. So when we talk about what we give up, there are things in which we give up to be a part of this space. And I'm not asking, well, in a sense, we're not asking for there to be an equal giving up in order to things to move forward. What I'm saying is recognize that me being a part of this space isn't so that I can sit and wait to be a senior pastor one day. It isn't to sit and wait so that I can get experience. Being a part of this community was I wanted to know what it was like to be a part of an intentional community that fought towards things and worked towards things. And I've seen that in Central. And this is just another area where Central needs to work at in order to continue to live out what it says. And I want to be a part of that process. And I want to feel as if I'm a part of that process. And so when we talk about these things, there are things, and we invite you, not just in this space because we are running out of time, but we are inviting you to come and talk to us, pull us over. Maybe we can go grab a cup of coffee. I think everyone has received kind of a pamphlet that shows who's on the team, phone calls, emails. If there's anything in which you want, and we'll put it online, there's some things that are there. So with that being said, I just want to end this opportunity with the word of prayer. I think that would be a good thing for us to do. We are grateful. We are extremely grateful for your patience in trying to get the audio working. I had a plan. My plan didn't work out. So plan D is what we're using right now. So that works out awesome. But I want to thank you for your patience. I want to thank you, everyone who was here with us today, for taking the time out. And we know that there are others who are going to see this recorded. Please feel free to get in contact with us after you see this. But just invite you to pray with me. And gracious and loving God, we give thanks for this opportunity to be in your in this space where we come in sometimes to just connect and just be with one another. And most times we're here to worship. More times we're here to receive something. And this is an opportunity for us to listen. So we'll thank you for all the people who are with us today, listening about what the anti-racism team has been doing. And I want to end this prayer with those last phrases that I mentioned before. Do not be afraid of the work that has no end. We cannot abandon it. We must continue to work towards the good of what he calls us to do. We pray all these things in the name of your son, Jesus. Amen. God bless and thank you all.